This is a new voice for a new Scotland.
IndyLive.Radio. IndyPram, yes, IndyPram on IndyLive.Radio. IndyPram, yes, IndyPram on IndyLive.Radio.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to St Andrew's Bearsden. We have a very busy night ahead of us, as I hope you're aware, and so I'm going to be very brief, thankfully, from your perspective. So, it's a night of two halves. The first half, we're going to have 5 speakers who are going to speak for 5 minutes each. We're then going to have questions for about 10 to 15 minutes. We will then have a break, and then we will have the second half, where we will have 2 speakers who will present the view from the Church of Scotland and the Roman Catholic Church. I'd now like to invite our speakers to come to the podium, please. And this evening, Amy Callaghan, who is a prospective candidate for East Dunbartonshire, and Amy will be representing the SNP view. We have Ross Greer to represent the Greens, Maurice Corrie to represent the Scottish Conservatives, Callum McNally to represent Scottish Labour, and Councillor Susan Murray to represent the Liberal Democrats. So in no particular order, if you'd quite like to come to stage.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me along tonight. I'm the SNP's candidate for East Dunbartonshire, and I'm here tonight to set out the SNP's position on Trident. I don't think I need a full 5 minutes to set out the SNP's position on Trident. Our party policy and my personal belief on this, and it couldn't be any more clear and long-standing, is that we should not have nuclear weapons on the Clyde or on this planet at all. There's no need for nuclear weapons. They should never be used. They're there as a deterrent. As a deterrent from what? It's not the norm for countries in this world to have nuclear weapons. We're one of the exceptions. And in our modern world, the threats we face are changing. They're changing on a daily basis. Nuclear weapons are not and never will be the answer to any threats, never mind threats such as cyber security hacks. I mean, realistically, it's just not the answer at all. So just to make completely clear, beyond reasonable doubt, the SNP do not support the retention of Trident, never mind its renewal. I believe, and the SNP believe, that the nuclear weapons are wrong, strategically, morally and financially. At times when measures of austerity are being imposed on people all over the United Kingdom, spending £205 billion over the next 30 years on a replacement nuclear weapons system that should never be used is absolutely abhorrent. I think that's money better off used on the NHS, childcare, education, building a better future for our children, and on conventional military methods. I don't think we should be using it on nuclear weapons at all. So in short, the SNP recognise the need for conventional military, both in the UK and in a future independent Scotland, but I must stress to be used only as an absolute last resort and not as a first port of call in conflict resolution. We genuinely do believe that all peaceful methods should be exhausted before we go into any sort of conflict. But I simply cannot be clearer on this. The SNP will never and do not support nuclear weapons being on our Clyde or being on anywhere on this planet. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, John, for being so patient and also inviting me to come and speak and put forward the Scottish Conservative and Unionist side of the debate about Trident. We as a party, and have always done, we believe that our continuous nuclear deterrent keeps this country safe, and I'm talking about the United Kingdom. HM Naval Base Clyde supports thousands of jobs, and the Conservatives across the UK are the only party standing up for thousands of jobs on Her Majesty's Naval Base Clyde. Now, it is very important that we remember we live in a very volatile world. We have to watch out only in our daily newspapers what's going on around the world. We have dictators behaving appallingly. We have a threat from the Russian country of Russia. And I can tell you something very strongly, that when I served in the British Army, I was a reservist. I was called up in 1995, went out to the Balkans in 1996, and I was there until 1999. And I had 38 years service to the colours, and retired in 2009. When I was a young soldier, when I was commissioned in 1972, I was a platoon commander allocated to a British Army of the Rhine unit. so that if anything happened in those days, in the days of the Soviet Union, we were ready and prepared on the ground. But as a young platoon commander with my soldiers, I realized at the back of it we had a deterrent in case something awful happened or was being threatened to us by the other side. And that is the reason why we have this in-depth deterrent behind us. And I can tell you something. When I was serving with NATO out in 1996 to 99, I was allocated to work with quite a lot of the Warsaw Pact countries in liaison with them, because they formed part of the Partnership for Peace. And I had a lot to do with the Russian Brigade. And I sat one day with a professor who, like me, was a reservist from Moscow University, and we were chatting away, and he said, "You know, Maurice, I am a great admirer of Margaret Thatcher. She's a strong woman, but you need to have strong leadership because you never know who's going to be in power in our country at any time. So for God's sake, do not drop your deterrent and do not drop your defences." Now, I don't think of any stronger argument than that. And that's why we in the Conservatives believe wholeheartedly that this is an investment to keep our country safe and keep our country in depth as far as deterrent. And so therefore, I do believe that we must continue to do that. How many people in this room are supportive of the armed forces? Hands up. Hands up. Must be more than that. Hands up. Must be more than that. Supportive. No? Not at all. I'm asking why. I have just come from a meeting in the Scottish Parliament. I had several people from Faslane Base who both served on Trident and also on the Astute class today. Very brave men and women who serve on that. And I must say, I was amazed at their career path and what they've been doing and their commitment to the job. So I believe we must support them. We need to support this country's deterrent. It is something that is an immense value to us in relation to the fact that it keeps us safe. Because you never know what's going on in the world of politics. We certainly don't know here. And so therefore, I believe that we must support that. And we must support the successor program, which is the Dreadnought class being built in this country to protect our nation. And that's where my argument rests. Thank you.
Yes, apologies for those that didn't hear me. I just want to say thank you very much to John for organising this and putting up with my emails, trying to figure out exactly where and when it was, and also to anyone else that was involved in putting it together. I'm Callaghan McNally. I am Labour's candidate for East Dunbartonshire in the swiftly up and coming general election, and I just want to thank you all as well for coming out to hear us all tonight. As I'm here representing the Labour Party, I'll give you the where the party's coming from in this particular issue. As a party, you know, of perspective of government, we take this issue incredibly seriously. It is a difficult one, and it's a difficult one for conscience, but fundamentally it is about national security. So the Labour Party supports the retention of Trident, and it currently supports its renewal. But unlike where the Conservatives come from or other parties in support of its retention, we do not believe in retention of nuclear weapons in perpetuity. In government, we would dedicate the extensive British diplomatic services to pursuing the end result of a world without nuclear weapons. I think we forget that the treaty to which we are signed up to, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, does not just limit the number of countries that can acquire nuclear weapons, it also commits its signatories to the pursuit of the end of any nuclear weapons on this planet. And that would be a key part of any Labour foreign policy. It is one of the issues that I feel very strongly about, that I am a multilateralist, but I mean that. I do want multilateral disarmament. We've seen a country that did disarm unilaterally. South Africa disarmed its nuclear weapons in the early 1990s. And as commendable as an effort that was, and it is one that I do believe passionately was commendable, it has not led to any other nation on this planet eliminating their nuclear arsenal. Instead, every country that did possess nuclear weapons then still has them, and more countries now also have them. So there needs to be a robust diplomatic process to actually bring an end to the use of nuclear weapons on this planet. And I believe the UK's continued retention of a nuclear deterrent is actually a step in that process, because to disarm now unilaterally would remove us from the top table of actually pursuing that end. The other thing that was mentioned by Maurice was also jobs, and it's something that I'm also passionate about. The number of jobs that are housed at Faslane at the end of the Clyde are incredibly important. and to simply disarm a nuclear deterrent immediately would leave a whole community decimated without one of its primary sources of employment. One of the things that the Labour Party is passionate about is pursuing green new alternative employment for people who either work in industries such as our nuclear deterrent, which may indeed be phased out, or any other harmful employment that's harmful to the climate. That is something that we're passionate about, and it's about not leaving communities bereft of their primary employer and leaving them isolated from the rest of the Scottish or UK community. So it's a complex issue which takes in a large number of issues. It is not simply about whether or not it's morally wrong. I believe nuclear weapons are morally wrong. I do personally believe that. But I believe that whether they're UK nuclear weapons, whether they're American nuclear weapons, whether they are Russian, Chinese, or French, or indeed any of the countries that are not legally allowed to have them. So I believe in a process of eliminating the nuclear arsenals of all of those countries and more, so that we have a world free of nuclear weapons as opposed to simply just our nation. Thank you very much. I don't see they've gone over time, so I'll finish it there. But thank you very much for your time.
I'm Susan Murray. I'm one of the councillors at East Dunbartonshire Council, and I'm also the parliamentary candidate for the neighbouring constituency of Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East. As a Liberal Democrat, we have a plan for a better world. In a world which feels increasingly unstable and unsafe, as people have referred to already, the Liberal Democrat plan is to renew international liberalism in Britain. The plan will tear down walls, not build them, bringing our country together and not breaking it up. We champion human rights, democracy and equality. Liberal Democrat priorities are defending international cooperation against the tides of nationalism and isolationism, supporting multilateral organisations like the UN and NATO, which are increasingly under threat, spending 0.7% of our gross national income on aid to reduce poverty, defending human rights, protecting the environment and preventing violent conflict worldwide, which is a figure that was agreed by the UK Parliament as a result of a Liberal Democrat private members' bill, and controlling arms exports to countries where poor human rights exist, and suspending arms sales to Saudi Arabia. In the Liberal Democrat plan for a better world, liberalism and cooperation have a vital role to play in securing peace, promoting democracy and defending human rights across the world. The rules-based international order that governed international relations for the past 70 years is under threat. Liberal Democrats are looking forward. We will build on the UK's proud record of international leadership through the European Union, the UN, NATO and the Commonwealth by promoting values of freedom and opportunities for all. We'll work with allies to champion this message, and that means championing the liberal, rules-based international order, which provides a strong basis to work together to address the world's biggest problems, using all aspects of government policy, trade, aid and diplomacy, as well as military cooperation, to strengthen UK efforts to prevent violent conflict, and increasing overseas financial support for the ongoing refugee crisis, focusing on countries that have accepted millions of refugees, tackling unlawful interference in democracies by working with European partners to enable sanctions against corrupt individuals, improving the control of arms exports, introducing a presumption of denial for arms exports to countries where human rights need to be strengthened. Liberal Democrats believe that despite efforts to prevent violent conflict, sometimes military intervention is necessary. We'll encourage dialogue and mediation to reduce conflict between and within countries, working through the UN and other agencies. The UK should only use military force when there is a clear or legal humanitarian case, endorsed by a vote in Parliament, working through international agencies where possible. And it has been said already, the armed forces play a vital role in the defence of our nation. Liberal Democrats understand the new challenges faced by our armed forces, and we're committed to supporting them by committing to the principle of a collective self-defence as laid out in the North Atlantic Treaty, and spending 2% of GDP on defence in line with the NATO recommendation, and promoting an international treaty on the principles and limits of the use of technology in modern warfare, maintaining a minimum nuclear deterrent while pursuing multilateral nuclear disarmament. This means continuing with the Dreadnought programme, the continued capacity to deploy Trident nuclear missiles using 3 submarines, and moving to medium readiness responsible posture to maintain the deterrent through measures such as unpredictable and irregular patrolling patterns. So, to sum up, the Liberal Democrat position is to accept the continuing presence of Trident missiles at Faslane to maintain a minimum nuclear deterrent. We believe the UK needs to step down the nuclear ladder to meet its obligations as a signatory to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Ultimately, we want a nuclear-free Britain and a nuclear-free world. We believe these aims and all of Britain's interests are best advanced by actively and constructively working with the UK's allies and partners in the European Union, the Commonwealth, the UN and NATO to develop effective global solutions. Only Liberal Democrats can renew international liberalism in Britain, and only Liberal Democrats will deliver a brighter future for Scotland within the UK and within the European Union. We'll maintain a minimum nuclear deterrent and pursue multilateral disarmament. At the same time, Liberal Democrats will strengthen UK efforts to prevent violent conflict and defend international cooperation and cooperate through the EU, the UN, NATO and the Commonwealth to secure peace. Thank you.
Right, thank you all very much for having me here tonight. I'm speaking on behalf of the Green Party, who exists. The Green movement across the world was created as a result of 2 movements, primarily the environmental movement and the movement against nuclear weapons. Greens have always been committed to the end of the existence of nuclear weapons on this planet. But personally, I'm also speaking as a Christian. I think there are very few issues that are black or white. I don't think God has an election manifesto. But there are some things that I have no doubt in my mind from a Christian perspective are an abomination, are a genuine evil. And these weapons, these genuinely world-ending weapons, are to me indisputably an evil. They are, by definition, a moral abomination. To use a nuclear weapon is nothing tactical. You can't use a nuclear weapon against your enemy. The only way that a nuclear strike would happen would result in millions of innocent people losing their lives. The first country to launch a nuclear strike would be the country that started a process that within a few hours would bring about the end of our world, the end of human civilization. That's what triggering a nuclear war would do. There are enough nuclear weapons on this planet to end all life on this planet many thousands of times over. So there are 2 scenarios for a country that brags about its ability to use nuclear weapons. Either you are that country that launches the first strike, you've committed the gravest crime against humanity, or you're the country who decides in response to that strike that the last act you're going to commit as a country before you're destroyed is to destroy someone else, to kill millions of other people. I think that is morally absolutely outrageous. But I also don't think these nuclear weapons make us any safer. In fact, I think they put us far, far more at risk. We look at the existence of nuclear weapons over the last 50, 60 years, and we see about a dozen occasions where by accident nuclear weapons were almost detonated. An American bomber that fell apart at 9,000 feet over North Carolina, and when we found out a few decades later that one of the 2 warheads on board almost detonated. Soviet and American missile detection systems that repeatedly went wrong and told their country they were under attack, and only because of the efforts of a few brave people disobeying orders did the world not end on at least 3 occasions. These weapons have not made us safer. They have brought our planet and our species to the brink of annihilation repeatedly. And we look at the threats that we face now in the world. Can any of these threats actually be dealt with by nuclear weapons? No. What are the biggest security threats to our country? Terrorism and insurgencies. You can't nuke ISIS. You can't nuke Al-Qaeda. You ask the US Navy what they think the biggest growing threats are in the world, and they'll say top of their list is climate change, is the climate crisis, and the conflicts that it is beginning to create, as well as the obvious effects that rising sea levels have on any country that's got military bases on its coast. You can't launch a nuclear weapon against the breakdown of the climate. What's the issue that's getting a lot of debate at the moment? Russian interference in our elections. That's through cyber attacks. That's state cyber terrorism. Nuclear weapons are no response to that. Nuclear weapons are simply not an effective defence against the threats we now face. I would have argued throughout the Cold War that they were morally unacceptable, but the Berlin Wall fell 5 years before I was born. It fell 30 years ago last week. We're in a different era now, and we need to accept the threats that we face in this era need dealt with in a fundamentally different way. And if we're going to spend £205 billion over the next couple of decades, and I believe it will be far higher, it's already twice as much as what they said it was going to be a few years ago, then we can use that money to genuinely make the world safer through international development, through education, through strengthening democracy and peace, through women's participation in countries across the planet. Or we could spend some of that money here. In a country where 1 in 4 children live in poverty, I think it's morally outrageous to be spending that money on a weapon system that we either can't use or could only use to bring about the end of the world. If we are going to spend this money, there are transformational ways that we could spend it on actual defence capabilities. There are transformational ways that we could spend it on international development. And there are transformational ways that we could spend it on improving the lives of people here in this country. Nuclear weapons are not only the worst way I can possibly think of to spend over £200 billion, but they are the greatest moral stain on any country that wishes to possess them. And I believe that we are far, far better than that. Thank you.
Good evening. So this is a question contributed by one of our senior pupils from the local schools, and it's directed towards Labour, Liberal or Conservative who would like to retain. So the question is, every year our school campaigns and collects for the Wayside Club and food banks. Is it morally permissible to spend taxpayers' money on a weapon that A, governments claim that they do not intend to use, B, that costs billions of pounds to set up, millions to maintain, and millions to decommission the older system, and C, could result in the deaths of millions of men, women and children, citizens who have had no say in the conflict?
Yes, I think I hear what you say in the question. One of the situations this is a personal view as well, is that we've got to think of the future and how we protect our populations. We can't tell what would happen elsewhere, when we have first and foremost a responsibility to ultimately guarantee ourselves, our current populations, and the future populations that come forward. And therefore it is very, very important that we maintain this continuous independent nuclear deterrent as that ultimate guarantee. I mean, basically, there's no state that currently has an intent or the capability to threaten the independence and integrity of the UK. I accept that. But you cannot live in a perfect world where there's an unpredictable security environment, whether it be conventional or whether it be on any greater side of that. And as far as our deterrent is concerned, it's absolutely a weapon of last resort. And I said to you before about what the professor told me over at a table, drinking a glass of beer in Hungary, and that really actually got to the core of my belief, and I think that we're doing the right thing. As I say, we also abhor the fact that people haven't got money to buy food and they're obviously having to use food banks. I actually agree with you. I mean, as I say, I know Ross said he's a Christian. I hope I'm a Christian. I'm Episcopalian, so I hope and I believe in the church. And I know the forces, but I believe we do have a Christian moral responsibility to protect that and do what we can to prevent poverty and those who are in a hard position. And by Jove, I know it. I deal with veterans. I chair the cross-party group for Armed Forces and Veterans Community, and every day I'm dealing with issues that veterans come to us on who have got post-traumatic stress disorder, over and above everything else, family breakup. Whatever it may be, children having to go into care, how do we cope with that? So I'm deeply concerned about that, but nevertheless, ultimately, we've got to protect our country because we just don't know what's out there.
Thank you very much. I think the crux of the question, is it morally right? Well, I think that all of us would probably agree that morally we should be absolutely looking after our own citizens and making sure that they don't have to visit food banks, that there is a safety net there for people, and that people who need extra mental health treatment and support can get that. So I think my answer to you would be that while the Liberal Democrats are supporting the minimum nuclear deterrent at the moment, it is with a view to working with our international partners towards nuclear disarmament, and that's a process that is not going to happen immediately, regardless of what politicians are saying today. But for today, for 2019-2020, we need to do both. And the Liberal Democrats will be, if elected, would be adjusting the universal credit system to make sure that nobody had to work 5 weeks for their payments, and to make sure that no working people had to go to food banks. So I think, for me, the answer is that we have to do both in the short to medium term.
Maurice, can you? Sorry, Callaghan.
Yep.
Brief one, please.
Yep, I'll be as quick as that. I'm somewhat echoing some of what's already been said, in the sense that well, first of all, actually, I'd like to thank the kids from the local school who do contribute to the local food banks and who do put in work, and anyone else in this room who puts in work with local food banks, local charities, or donates to them. I'm incredibly grateful for everyone that does that, but I'm also incredibly disappointed that they have to. I think that is also a great stain in our country, and that is something that is a result of other political choices that the Labour Party would not make. Susan just mentioned they would amend universal credit in order to roll back the 5-week waiting period. Labour would scrap it altogether because it's a fundamentally punitive system that it was brought in order to dissuade people from actually claiming the benefits that they were genuinely entitled to, and to put them in incredibly precarious and difficult situations. And I think that's a moral abhorrence as well, and it's something that hopefully in the next months we will be able to put an end to. In terms of the money that is spent on Trident, though, it is a difficult issue, and I can understand it is a huge amount of money to look at in one go. The difficulty I have about talking about how we would spend it in other ways is that it doesn't do justice to the actual question, which is that most parties who commit themselves to either scrapping or not scrapping the nuclear deterrent also commit themselves to meeting the requirement of the 2% spending on defence that is required by NATO members. Certainly the Labour Party also looks to do that. So what the question really is that if we were going to scrap our nuclear deterrent, that money would, in order to be in line with that commitment, have to be spent in the defence sector, which is something that is a legitimate argument to have, but it does not go to the work of reducing food banks or tackling any of these other moral issues. But we can do that also. We have more than enough wealth in this country to remove those sort of issues from everyday life, and the Labour Party is committed to doing that.
Okay, Callaghan.
Again, I'm asking on behalf of the young people who would be here tonight. I think this is really for you, Mr. Callaghan. With Iran expelling UN inspectors and tensions increasing between India and China, with the escalating race between Russia and the USA to develop hypersonic weapons, would it not be irresponsible for us to give up Trident unilaterally at this dangerous moment?
The short answer to that question is no. I don't think there is a bad time to get rid of Trident, to be perfectly honest with you. Regardless of tensions between other countries, and we do understand that there are tensions, we're not belittling those situations at all. We're fully appreciative of them and we understand the significance of them, but what we're saying is nuclear weapons are not the answer to those situations, and having them or not having them doesn't make the United Kingdom, I think having them makes the United Kingdom more of a target for these countries than it does not having them at all. And I think, to echo what Ross said, there is no need for countries to have nuclear weapons as a deterrent at all. I think these conflicts and stuff, they're going to be escalated by nuclear weapons existing, to be perfectly honest with you, and to think that our one government leader could push the button, which was the point I was going to raise, was for the last question, was that the leader of the Liberal Democrats was on national TV just last week saying that she would push the button. I don't believe there should be a button to be pushing, to be perfectly honest with you, and I don't think we should have a one with nuclear weapons, regardless of the situation with other countries.
Yeah, very much just to echo that, I find it utterly bizarre that it's apparently something that you should say to qualify yourself for the office of Prime Minister, to proudly commit to wiping out all life on Earth. Like, to me, that should disqualify you from the office of Prime Minister. Specific points of tension that were raised, so one of the points there was about India and China. I actually think the single biggest risk of a nuclear conflict on this planet at the moment is between India and Pakistan, two nuclear armed nations who've got an obvious history of conflict and tension between India and Pakistan is increasing. Now, for a start, I can't for the life of me understand why the UK having nuclear weapons would resolve the situation between India and Pakistan. That misunderstands that situation and our role in it. And how does our threat to get involved in a nuclear war make that less likely? It doesn't work. But if you want to look at the reasons why the situation between India, Pakistan and China is escalating on that border around Kashmir that all three countries share, one of the issues that's driving that is the acute and increasing shortage of water caused by the climate crisis. What is increasing tension in that part of the world are these intense heat waves that are forcing people from where they normally live to other areas. People are cutting off water supplies that cross borders. That increases tension. If you speak to any defence analyst who looks at the situation between India, Pakistan and China, say how do we reduce tension in that area, it's all about water security. So if we actually want to make the world safer and in turn make the UK safer, instead of spending £200 billion on nuclear weapons, we could spend £200 billion and more on tackling the climate crisis to reduce the threat of these conflicts starting in the first place. Our having nuclear weapons does not reduce the risk of a nuclear conflict between India and Pakistan, two countries that will give the nuclear button to field commanders in a conflict. What we need to do is make sure those conflicts don't happen in the first place, and that's about addressing the issues that are causing them. The issue that is causing that flashpoint at the moment is intense global heat waves caused by the climate crisis. That's what we should be tackling.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Just to introduce Father John Gannon, who is the parish priest of St Philomena's and is also the chaplain at Barlinnie and Low Moss, and he is going to present the view from the Catholic Church.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. The Church's social teaching on nuclear weapons in 5 minutes, so we'll see. I want to kind of break down what I'm going to say tonight into kind of 3 parts, 3 very quick parts. Start off generally and then gradually focus in. In very general terms, I think we'll all agree that the use of nuclear weapons is a catastrophe. It's a disaster, it's failure. But more specifically from the Church's social teaching point of view, the use of nuclear weapons is always and absolutely immoral. Now, that comes about largely through the principles of the just war theory. The use of nuclear weapons is rendered immoral by at least 2 of the criteria of the just war theory. Proportionality, that any decision to go to war or any response within war has to be proportionate to the offence caused. And secondly, the principle of discrimination, that you should not involve, as far as is possible, non-competence. War is meant to be between competence. So clearly, nuclear weapons being so indiscriminate and so earth-shattering that that principle just gets kicked entirely out the window, that you're making any kind of attempt to avoid involving non-competence. So the Church's teaching has always been clear and consistent on the use of nuclear weapons. It's immoral. They have, however, made a distinction between the use, a moral distinction, between the use of nuclear weapons and the possession of nuclear weapons. In other words, having nuclear weapons as a deterrence. Now, I wouldn't say the Church has been happy about the possession of nuclear weapons, quite the opposite, but they have not entirely closed the door on the possession of nuclear weapons. Going back to Pacem in Terris in 1963, Pope John's encyclical, written incidentally in the immediate aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis, John follows Pius XII in condemning the use of nuclear weapons, but he's prepared to leave the door open a wee bit about allowing the possession of nuclear weapons as a deterrence, but, and this is the crucial point, it's always seen as a transitional stage towards disarmament. So there is, the Church has never envisaged a permanent state of nations possessing nuclear weapons. They've been prepared, up until fairly recently, to concede the possession of nuclear weapons as a transitional stage on the road to disarmament. But increasingly in the last maybe 20 years, everybody kind of says this is through Francis, but Francis has maybe accelerated it, but it was certainly happening in John Paul's time and in Benedict's. Increasingly, I would say that when you survey the Church's teaching, that door's closing. That the Church is no longer as prepared as once it was to admit of the morality of possessing nuclear weapons. So it's accelerating under Francis. So you read Francis's statements, it's fairly clear the direction of travel, that the Church is increasingly uncomfortable to the point of probably about to exclude it entirely, but it's increasingly uncomfortable with this notion that the possession of nuclear weapons is a moral act. I suppose it's a bit of analogous to the Church's teaching capital punishment. Church was never happy about capital punishment, but the Catechism did allow it as morally permissible in very limited circumstances, but eventually those circumstances were reduced to the most recent edition of the Catechism excludes it entirely. So I suspect that that's the mood music, that's the direction of travel. Now, that takes us on to the more specific point that we are talking about tonight of Trident. The official teaching of the Church at the moment is still, I'm talking about the official teaching, even though the direction of travel is heading in another direction, but the official teaching at the kind of level of the Catechism and official documents is still to see the possession of nuclear weapons as morally defensible. Probably not for a huge amount longer, but that's the position at the moment. That does not mean that every weapons system then is morally defensible. It's possible morally to concede the general principle, but not every specific principle. So you could be in a situation where you are willing to accept the moral legitimacy of the possession of nuclear weapons, but then we come to the specific instance of a particular country's nuclear weapons, and other moral questions can come in here as well. And if we're thinking about Trident, then the other moral questions, in addition to the more general ones that apply to all nuclear weapons, are precisely those ones of economics. We live in a country where there were 1.5 million visits to food banks last year. In that kind of circumstance, is it morally permissible to spend enormous sums of money on a missile system like Trident? So these are the kind of moral issues that groups like Justice and Peace are wrestling with. And these are the kind of issues that the Church is encouraging us to reflect on. You might be a wee bit surprised to hear that the Church's teaching is changing here. That's because Catholic social teaching is a slightly different form of theology from dogmatic theology, which might be a bit more certain, you could say, or stable. You know, we're not going to change our position on how many persons are there in the Trinity in the near future. That's kind of set. Church's social teaching takes its sources from a variety of areas. Scripture, theology, yes, but also history, geography, politics, economics, the kind of secular sciences. So it sees itself more as a contribution to the debate rather than here am I laying down the law and presenting you in tablets of stone what the truth is. So if you like, it's a work in progress, the Church's social teaching. And that's why I can say that over the last 20 years or so, the Church's view on the possession of nuclear weapons has actually been changing and developing, and it will continue to develop. But if you take a survey of the different bishops' conferences, of the different statements of the popes, the last 3 popes, then you can very much see that we are moving as a church in the direction of saying that actually not only is the use of nuclear weapons utterly and absolutely immoral, which we've always said, but we're now prepared, I think, to say that the actual possession, because morally, how can you separate the possession from the intention? What's the point of possessing something that you don't intend to use? And the moral argument runs that the threat to use them must carry with it, at least in some form, the intention to use them. And of course, in morality, intention is everything. So if you intend to use those weapons, then the argument runs that that cannot really be seen as a moral act. So that really is, as I say, in about 5 minutes to try and present the whole of the Church's teaching. But the use of nuclear weapons, always and absolutely immoral. The possession of nuclear weapons, we are no longer as accepting of the deterrence argument as we were maybe in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, where it was being presented as this is a transitional stage on the road to disarmament. 75 years down the line, I think we can safely say nobody really in position of power is taking that disarmament argument seriously. They're all planning new and super duper better weapons. So the argument that used to run, this is a stage towards disarmament, we're no longer accepting that. And the natural consequence then is to say, well, your intention clearly is to at least consider the possibility of using these weapons. And if you're considering the possibility of something deeply immoral, then that in itself is deeply immoral. So that's about as much as I really want to say there. Thank you.
And now I'd like to invite the Very Reverend Alan MacDonald to sum up the position from the Church of Scotland angle. Alan was a moderator of the Church of Scotland. He's been active in this area for many, many years, and it's a real privilege to invite him along, especially since they got the bus this morning at 9 o'clock from Cromarty to be here.
It's lovely to be here. It's just wonderful to see 3 congregations here. I understand that you want me to say a little about the position of the Church of Scotland on nuclear weapons, and I'm happy to do that. I know about it because I was there when our position changed. Since 1978, as a young minister, a long time ago, already passionate about nuclear disarmament, I had always tried to attend the General Assembly on Church and Nation Day, which is a time when, as a commissioner or just one person, you can be up in the gallery or you can be on the floor. The highlight for me was always in the week. It was always the annual debate on nuclear weapons. And in the end, the debate always seemed to come down to 2 people. The famous George MacLeod of the Iona community and a church elder from Ely in Fife, a Mr. G.N. Warnock, who was a retired army colonel. Interestingly, nobody knew what his name was. G.N. was just what it was called. Every year, George MacLeod, a wonderful orator, made a compelling case about the evil of nuclear weapons. Just that, no more. Year after year, the General Assembly politely listened and then chose to vote for the deterrent argument put forward by Colonel Warnock. However, at what turned out to be one of MacLeod's last Assembly appearances, when he was 91, at the end of his passionate speech, he put forward a motion which said this: "As of now, the General Assembly declare that no church can accede to the use of nuclear weapons to defend any cause whatever." As MacLeod slowly was making his way back to the seat, the Assembly could already see the ramrod figure of Colonel G.N. Warnock walking up to the podium. However, from the very start of his speech, the commissioners were hearing something very different. He said that he had risen not to oppose, but to support George MacLeod, you could have heard a pin drop. As the retired colonel said that for him, everything had changed that year, 1986, and all because of Chernobyl. And he went on to say that if he were still a serving soldier and was ordered to press the nuclear button, he would not be prepared to do it now and would shoot himself first. The colonel returned to his seat as thunderous applause echoed round the old wooden rafters of the Kirk's debating chamber. And that day in 1986, Lord MacLeod's motion was carried by a huge majority. So, to answer the question that ever since 1986, this has been the settled position of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. And so that was why in 2018 I was able to move this motion, which was adopted unanimously. The General Assembly reaffirm the belief that possession, use, or threat of nuclear weapons is inherently evil. Congratulate the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, ICAN, on being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2018. Welcome the establishment of an international treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons and urge the UK government to engage with the treaty process, a way for the UK to disarm its nuclear weapons. So that's fairly clear. And finally, various people have asked me to say something just quickly about the different ways that different denominations see things. These days, the Church and Society Council, which we have now, regularly cooperates with other denominations through an ecumenical body known as the Joint Public Issues Team. It's made up of the Methodist Church, the United Reformed Church, and the Baptist Union and the Church of Scotland. One of the key issues for these denominations is peacemaking around the issues of the arms trade, nuclear weapons, and a nuclear ban treaty. And finally, for example, when I was the moderator of the General Assembly in 2006 to 2007, I invited Mario Conti. I invited Mario to come and walk with me for part of a peace pilgrimage from Fastlane to the Scottish Parliament. And Mario said, I can still remember him saying it, I've never been there. And I said, yes, I know, but Mario, I really would like you as a friend to come and do this. So he did. And the Cardinal was also more than happy to walk with me on that pilgrimage. And these are just a couple of examples of ecumenical cooperation at its very best, I think. Thanks very much for listening.
What are we going to do to clean up this mess?
So to address your question, obviously I agree that we should have nuclear weapons. I think I've made that perfectly clear. I don't think that the UK government addresses this issue properly at all, given they can't even look after the current and decommissioned nuclear weapons and nuclear subs. I don't think we should be talking about the renewal of Trident. I think we should be prioritising the exact issue that you've raised, and I think it's disgraceful that it hasn't been done so far. Thank you for raising it as an issue.
So, as you'd expect, I agree. I think that comes back to, there's a point that Morris made about our responsibility to future generations. Now, the decommissioned subs that are, exactly as Paul says, are rotting away at Versailles, are presenting an increasing risk now. But we have to set policy and we have to make decisions with future generations in mind. And when you talk about the decommissioning of the nuclear material from these submarines, we're not talking about disposal, because that's not how this material works. You're talking about storing it as safely as we possibly can. And we actually had to, when the world superpowers were thinking of how to start quote-unquote disposing of nuclear material, they had to come up with what is essentially a whole new language, because the containers that we put this incredibly dangerous stuff in are not going to last as long as the dangerous material inside. But they're all going to last longer than any of us sitting here now, and we don't know who will be responsible for them next. we don't know how stable society will be in 100 years' time. So there's this whole new language on them that is there in the hope that no matter who's there in 100 years' time, they still know that what's inside is incredibly dangerous. But that's still an incredibly irresponsible thing to do. The creation of these weapons is not something that can be easily reversed. It's not something that can be essentially reversed at all in terms of the grand scheme of how long our civilization, our country at least, is going to last. So we're talking about a long-term irresponsibility there, both with what is currently languishing at Rosyth, but also the UK's other way of disposing of these of nuclear material is to dump it in Australia on indigenous Aboriginal land. There are Aboriginal tribes in America who are fighting against the dumping of UK, European and American nuclear waste on their land. They did absolutely nothing to cause that, but this danger is being dumped on them. And the real danger from this material, what makes it so risky, is anyone who comes across that, the real fear that so many security analysts have around nuclear material is one guy with one backpack, if he can secure that stuff, even a tiny amount of it, has created a dirty bomb that can be detonated in a city centre. Massively dangerous, and we are utterly unable to dispose of it. It's literally impossible to dispose of. So it's wildly irresponsible to create something so dangerous that you then cannot undo.
Thank you. So first of all, I would like to say that on a personal basis, I am totally opposed to nuclear weapons. However, as a politician, I feel I have to look at it on a different basis, and I'm very comfortable with the way that the Liberal Democrats look at it, which is to reduce, according to the treaty, which was mentioned by the Church of Scotland and the General Assembly, for government to use treaty to reduce the amount of nuclear arms that there are. With the disposal of nuclear material, I think absolutely, I completely agree. We have to find a way of doing it which is fair to future generations. We can't just dig a big hole, line it with concrete, pour it all in and cover it all up. This nuclear material comes from a mine, it comes from a country in the first place, which is radioactive. So one of the things that I would like to see is looking at investigating after it's been used for whatever purpose by a particular country. It goes back to the mine that it was mined from in the first place. And that mine is then used as the storage area, rather than creating some economy round about storage of nuclear waste. So it's really a question of absolutely working internationally to reduce the production of nuclear waste in this way that's not disposed of responsibly, and to do that through the treaties and through the processes to work with other countries.
The question in relation to cybersecurity, strongly enough, I was just talking to one of my colleagues here about that in the tea break, about that is obviously going to be a future issue. There is the creation of 77 Brigade, which is a collection of highly qualified scientists and IT specialists, which has been formed down at GCHQ to actually build that up. So the resources are by this government being put into that at the same time.
Just to come on to what Maurice was saying there, I think it's a bit too little too late on cybersecurity. It's a current issue, it's not a future issue. You know, we've got these things happening just now. And on drones as well, I actually wrote my dissertation on the proportionality of drone strikes in Pakistan by the United States. They're not proportional and they're not justified. I compared it to just war theory. They might look like they're a better form of weapons and they are a better form than nuclear weapons, but they should still not be used because the level of civilians being killed from them is still absolutely abhorrent and completely tragic, and I wouldn't support any of these weapons being used against people.
Take my Green Party hat off for a moment and address the point around our role as Christians. I think as Christians we've been given a mission to build the kingdom on earth, and we've not been told to do it slowly, we've been told to go and do it. And our role should be to constantly think about how can we build that better world, how can we build it quickly, how can we live up to that promise. I think that's a moral responsibility that we all have, and when we're talking about something that in the blink of an eye could annihilate life on earth, then we should always be treating that as an issue of urgency, an issue that we should constantly be striving towards the end of. And to get to the nub of this, we're talking about, do nuclear weapons make us safer or do they not? And I clearly believe that they do not. But I don't believe the UK government maintains nuclear weapons because they sincerely believe that they'll make us safer. The UK government maintains a nuclear arsenal and is prepared to spend over £200 billion renewing that nuclear arsenal for one reason alone: to keep its seat on the UN Security Council. The UK government still suffers from the delusion that we're a superpower. I don't want to be part of a superpower. That's not the kind of country I'm interested in living in. I want to live in a decent country. I want to live in a country that I can be proud of. I want to live in a country that I believe is sincerely contributing towards a better world. There was talk earlier on about how the UK contributes 0.7% of GDP to international development and 2% to the NATO target of defence spending. Well, surely the first thing that we can do to contribute towards a better world is turn those numbers around. 2% to international development, 0.7% to defence, because the best way to build a safer world is to build a world where everyone on this planet has a decent quality standard of living and the safety to go to bed each night not worried about the destruction of their own community. I think we can play a positive role in building that kind of world. We don't build that with a nuclear arsenal, and we don't build it by throwing all the money we can at defence spending when there are people crying out for food and water and a home over their head.
IndyPram, yes, IndyPram, on IndyLive.Radio. IndyPram, yes, IndyPram, on IndyLive.Radio.
This is a new voice for a new Scotland.
IndyLive.Radio.